Reflections on the top of the power structure. So it's contextual in the sense that power structures amongst adults versus power structures amongst children and adolescents psychologically. The child that needs, the adolescent that desires. The child does not want to grow up because they are incapable of taking responsibility for their life as a child and in a childlike state, in a traumatized state. The child feels that they are 5 years old, that they are 6 years old. The traumatized, regressed person feels as if they are a child regardless of their physical maturity. And what every child needs is a parent. And what every child needs is a competent person who will respond to what they cannot respond to. So to the degree that we have not grasped, understood, and healed our unresolved trauma, we give our authority, we give our responsibility, our ability and willingness to respond to an authority, a parental figure. What shall I do? Take care of this for me. Fix this for me. What shall I do? And in a highly traumatized culture, there will be great demand for autocratic leadership, for parental leadership. Thou shalt do this for thine own good. And this is desired. Now, typically speaking, the cult or culture that raises this amount of grown-up children and adolescents is not terribly competent. For one, it's not competent to heal trauma. For another, it's not competent to initiate its young adults into adulthood. For another, it hasn't grasped psychological literacy, which means it has not grasped relational literacy, which means that to some extent we're dealing with the reptilian brain. We're dealing with sociopathic elements in the cult. And in that dynamic, the child, the adolescent, is looking for someone to tell them what to do. Now, anyone can have the role if they appear omniscient. Now, the reason appearance is important is that a child, an adolescent, grasping their own inability to respond to the various things in their lives, is giving away their power to act, their power to think, their power to respond freely as individuals. And they're giving it to someone, a parental figure, to determine their lives. Now, if you're giving away that amount of power, the power to affect one's entire life, one wants to feel safe. One wants to feel secure. One wants to feel that this is a good idea. Now, why doesn't the child and adolescent want that power? Too many mistakes, too many failures, too many instances of their own freedom and power leading to failure, leading to scarcity, leading to pain. Being punished is the greatest fear of the child and adolescent. Being punished, being humiliated is the greatest fear of the child and adolescent in a sociopathic environment. You didn't do the right thing, you made a mistake, therefore you will be punished. No, says the child. Someone else take this authority. Now, the person that takes on the role, the authority, is, in a sense, going to be punished in their own way, because the child, the adolescent, is giving the authority so that they will not be punished. And they're quite happy to give up the power, the authority, because it alleviates, it allows them to stay children and be taken care of in some way, or the promise of being taken care of. However, it's an absolute catastrophe for the child and adolescent to realize that the parental figure they've given their authority to does not know what they're doing, and is not going to perfectly manage their lives. Why is this a catastrophe? Well, because then it means that the individual, the child, the adolescent, has to take responsibility, has to own that they actually have the ability to respond regardless of anything else going on in their life, and then they have to respond. So it's a terrifically uncomfortable thing, because when you respond as an individual, you will get it wrong. You will make mistakes, and in a sociopathic environment, you will be punished for those mistakes with shame, with humiliation, with bankruptcy, with whatever it is, with being left to die, being left without medical care, being left without a house. You will be punished for your by a sociopathic environment for your mistakes. So you don't want to make any mistakes. So what's the best way for a child and adolescent not to make mistakes? To blame it on the parent, to find an authority figure who will make decisions for them, and then hold them accountable. And, you know, this is a matter of degrees. You know, for example, if you are going on a trip to the moon and you would like to prepare for orbit, giving away your responsibility to a NASA, to a SpaceX, a Blue Origin, who has done it before, and, you know, at least SpaceX and NASA and, you know, the Russians have sent people to space before. Deferring your authority, your authorship, your ability and willingness to respond to an expert who says, you know, don't wear nylon as a spacesuit, wear this as a spacesuit. We tried that and it didn't work. This is relatively intelligent. And you know, you could say that it is a healthy, responsible choice, an adult choice, to defer to someone else in a given area. At the same time, there are no perfect people. There are no perfectly competent people, which means that every single person is going to make mistakes. And ultimately, if you pick someone to guide you into space, you are responsible, meaning you must be able and willing to respond when they make a mistake on your behalf. When you make a mistake, to pick them when they're not competent enough to be picked. It ultimately comes back to the individual in that while we don't necessarily choose our parents, we do choose the experts, the mentors, the people that we want to guide our lives. And as such, you know, our life will go up or down based on the competency of those we pick. Now, because the culture that raises so many children and adolescents in grown bodies is a relatively incompetent culture, there are relatively few highly competent, adult, mature people within such a culture. And so you have a transference of power from the incompetent child adolescents who want to give away their power, and the largely incompetent children and adolescents who want to take the power. And the question is, how does this exchange get sustained? You know, if you've got incompetent people on both sides of the equation, how do the children and adolescents who want to give to an omnipotent parental figure, how do they sustain their basis for giving, and how does the person receiving the power sustain their basis for receiving? And one of the biggest bases is lies. The person in power has got to maintain the illusion of omnipotence and competence. And otherwise, all the children will say, no, you're bad, you deserve to be punished, and throw, rotten tomatoes at them, etc. And then find someone else who promises to be the perfect parent. And so we can see this best in politics. So one of the rules in politics is, I'll hire you as my press secretary or my this or the whatever. However, everyone around the top child, who's the top incompetent person, but who's donning the role of power, everyone around them has to be willing to be what's called a fall guy, a scapegoat. So that because in a world without adults, in a world without competent parents, you have paralysis. And so the movement is facilitated by electing someone, typically a child and adolescent, who is going to pretend to be statesman-like. And it's really, in many ways, a performance. I'm going to sound, I have a deep voice. It's just purely heuristics. 20,000 years ago, a deep voice typically meant a bigger body. A bigger body typically meant superior mass. In a law of brute force, bigger mass typically meant more survival. And so, do you want to be following, a muscle man into the wilderness or into war, or do you want to be following someone who's tiny and fragile into war or into the jungle? And so most people went with the law of brute force, and whoever was biggest and strongest and looked the scariest in a sociopathic environment, they survived more, and so people followed them. And so, tall and booming voice. We're no longer doing hand-to-hand combat, in case anyone has been paying attention, but it's still the dominant sense of this must be a leader because they're big and have a deep voice, and they're male, because if you were going into battle 20,000 years ago, you wanted to follow a male who had better aim and spear throwing skills by just arm design than the typical female. And so it doesn't take too much to iterate that over a 20,000 year period into an awareness of what a good leader might look like today. But, that's where that instinct of big and strong and male and deep comes from. And so it's pretty easy to get children and adolescents to follow, a machismo male, as long as they will lie and cover up all of their mistakes, all of their insecurities, all of their incompetence, and blame all the people around them, and hide the truth and cover it all up. And so this is playing out constantly. Children elect a new parent who's going to be perfect and who promises them everything's going to be wonderful and blah, 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 blah. And then after a time, they discover, often to the great dismay of the children, because they want to believe in a perfect parent who can rescue them, who can take care of them for the rest of their lives. You know, I did what the government told me, I did what my parents told me, I did this and this and this, and my life isn't working. But let's find a new parent, a new guru, a new Jesus or whatever, because I don't want to think for myself. I don't want to think, I don't want to feel, I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to acknowledge that I am able to respond, and that it is ultimately my choice to respond based on my own thoughts and feelings and analysis, if I have the courage to make them and do them, or respond to somebody else. And it's ultimately my choice who I vote for in the mix of incompetent parents pretending to be omnipotence. Because you have to be willing to lie in many cases to be a politician, because for the most part you have very little power. You know, if people won't support you in this, and you can't do it. I mean, you're just one body. So people have to go along with you, and they're usually not going to go along with ideas. Children do not like hearing, you've got to work harder, you've got to grow and work smarter. They like hearing, we're going to take care of you. However, the more you lie and say that the government, who has no power other than taking the people's money and laws and discipline and fear, the government ultimately, who has no power, must rely on cooperation of the people. And if the people don't want to grow and get smarter, etc., then the economy over a long period is going to decline relative to some other country that's perhaps more fear-based, more hungry to and threatened with elimination, etc., to survive and grow, and their economy will grow. And yours isn't. And whether you elect someone who says they're going to make you grow, or you elect someone who, who says they're going to take care of you, that doesn't mean that they can. There is an underlying mathematics and physics of the situation. But a child will generally elect the person who promises to take care of them, and not elect the person who says you're going to have to do it yourself, because we can't do it even if we want to. You know, why should we elect you as an authority figure? We want to be taken care of. Similarly, the dynamic of leadership. You know, you have burying the truth, spinning the truth, lying, scapegoating your people. But it's a very frustrating situation because ultimately, you know, in an incompetent culture, everyone wants to be a child and an adolescent and be taken care of, because nobody received competent parenting, you know, at a level in which they grew up. And so the leader is trying to gain resources through lies and deceptions and stuff, and feels tremendously burdened to have all the faults of everyone. You know, in a child culture, the leader will be blamed for everything that goes wrong, and will be told you're great if everything goes right. But of course, they have very little control over that in many ways. So this creates, you know, a difficult dynamic of betrayal in which, you know, finally there's a mistake that's so big that even the children have to acknowledge that their parent is not perfect, which creates this huge crisis and fervor and outrage and rage, because you're asking us to grow up and take responsibility for ourselves, and we don't want to. You know, how dare you betray our boundless, ill-informed trust that you're going to fix everything. How dare you do that when we don't want to grow up? We just want to do what we're told and have everything work out wonderfully. So some thoughts about leadership.